The ruthless CEO bought Serha's company for one reason: absolute revenge. She had run from him 5 years ago, and now he had her trapped. He threatened her career, froze her accounts, and promised to make her life a living hell. But his cold, calculating revenge violently shattered when he followed her home and saw 3 5-year-olds with his exact, piercing eyes. The untouchable boss just realized he's a father, and to win his children's trust, he has to drop to his knees and beg the woman he just tried to destroy. Stay until the end to see if he'll kneel and beg the woman he just destroyed. The ceramic coffee cup exploded against the polished hardwood floor, sending scalding dark liquid splashing across Serha's tailored black slacks, but she didn't even flinch. She couldn't feel the heat. She could only hear the heavy, synchronized boots of 24 corporate auditors storming the Horizon marketing agency. Serha, what do we do? Chloe, her young assistant, grabbed her arm, her voice pitched in absolute panic. They're unplugging the servers. They're boxing up the physical files. Don't panic, Chloe. Just step back, Serha ordered, though her own heart was hammering a frantic rhythm against her ribs. I can't not panic. They're saying it's the gene conglomerate, Chloe whispered frantically, her fingernails digging into Serha's sleeve. They bought out our parent company overnight. All of our contracts, our NDAs, everything belongs to them now. And the chairman is coming up the private elevator right now. The chairman. Serha breathed, the air completely vanishing from her lungs. Tae-Jin. Yes, the new CEO. Serha, he's notoriously ruthless. He fired an entire executive board last week before his morning coffee. What if we lose our jobs? I have to leave, Serha choked out. The overwhelming instinct to run practically vibrated in her bones. Chloe, listen to me. Tell them I was sick. Tell them I had a family emergency. Tell them whatever you have to, but I need to get to the stairs right now. You can't leave. You're the creative director. I don't care about the title, Chloe. I have to go. Serha pivoted, her heels slipping slightly on the spilled coffee as she lunged toward the emergency stairwell. She didn't care about her pension. The only thing that mattered was keeping Tae-Jin away from her. If he saw her, he would dig into her life, and if he dug into her life, he would find the triplets. Locked down the floor, a deep, gravelly voice echoed through the bullpen, freezing the blood in Serha's veins. The executive elevator doors had hissed open. No one leaves this floor until I have addressed the senior management, the voice commanded. It was a voice that had haunted Serha's nightmares every single night for half a decade. You there? By the exit, a sharp, authoritative voice snapped from behind her. It was one of his elite security handlers. Step away from the stairwell. Turn around and face the CEO. Please, I just need to use the restroom, Serha lied, keeping her back turned, her voice trembling. Turn around. Now, the guard barked. Serha gripped the edge of a nearby cubicle to keep her knees from buckling and slowly turned around. Tae-Jin was standing in the center of the bullpen. He was no longer the passionate university student who used to sneak her into his penthouse. Dressed in a bespoke, pitch-black 3-piece suit, his jawline sharp enough to cut glass, he radiated a terrifying, untouchable authority. And then his dark, obsidian eyes locked onto Serha. Serha, he breathed, the sound so faint it was nearly swallowed by the hum of the office servers, yet it struck her ears like a thunderclap. For a fraction of a millisecond, the terrifying CEO vanished, replaced by the shattered man she had left behind. But the vulnerability lasted only a second. It was instantly replaced by a darkness so profound, Serha took a physical step back. Senior management, Tae-Jin said, his voice dropping an octave to a low, vibrating purr. In the boardroom. Now, everyone else, return to your desks. He turned on his heel and strode toward the glass-walled executive boardroom. Serha, that's you, Chloe nudged her. You have to go in there. I can't, Serha whispered. Director Serha, a man in a black suit interrupted, blocking her path. The CEO is waiting. Serha swallowed the heavy lump of fear in her throat. She smoothed down her slacks, lifted her chin, and walked into the boardroom. The agency's CEO and CFO were already sitting at the mahogany table, sweating profusely. Tae-Jin was standing at the head of the table, looking out the window. Serha slipped into the chair closest to the door. As of 8 o'clock this morning, Horizon Marketing is wholly owned by the Jin conglomerate. Tae-Jin began, his back still to them. I have reviewed your numbers. Your management structure is bloated. Your client retention is a joke. Sir, if you just give us a transition period, the agency's CEO started. I don't care about your projections, Tae-Jin cut him off, spinning around, his eyes locking entirely on Serha. I didn't buy this company for your profit margins. You are the creative director. Yes, sir. I am, Serha forced herself to say, meeting his terrifying gaze. Get out, Tae-Jin barked, not breaking eye contact with her. Sir? You want the creative director to leave? The agency's CEO asked in confusion. No, Tae-Jin snarled, slamming his hand flat against the table. I want you and the CFO to get out. You're fired. You have 10 minutes before security physically throws you onto the street. The two men scrambled out of the room. Serha instantly stood up, grabbing her notebook. I will pack my things as well, Mr. Jin. Sit down, Tae-Jin commanded softly. You just fired the senior management team. I am senior management. I said, sit down, Serha. She slowly lowered herself back into the chair. Tae-Jin walked around the table, stopping directly in front of her, completely blocking her exit. He pressed a button on the wall panel, and the electronic blinds slid down, sealing them in absolute privacy. 5 years, Tae-Jin gritted out, his breath hot against her face, his voice trembling with a mixture of profound grief and consuming rage. For 5 years, I ripped this city apart looking for you. I hired private investigators. I bribed police. You vanished like a ghost. I had to, Serha choked out, a single tear escaping her eye. I told you in the letter. We were over. You belonged in your world, and I belonged in mine. The letter was a lie. Tae-Jin snapped, his fingers digging into the leather of her chair. You expect me to believe that after everything we shared, you just woke up one day and decided you didn't love me anymore? It wasn't a lie, Serha pushed back, her heart breaking as she maintained the deception to protect her kids. I wanted a simple life. I couldn't handle the pressure of the Jin conglomerate. I couldn't handle your father. My father is dead, Tae-Jin whispered, his voice dropping to a chillingly calm register. He passed away 3 years ago. I am the chairman now. I control the board. I control the wealth. No one tells me what to do anymore, Serha. Not my family, and certainly not you. Serha's breath hitched. His father was dead? The man who had threatened to make her unborn children disappear was gone? I spent $40 million acquiring this redundant firm the second my investigators found your name on their payroll, Tae-Jin continued. I didn't buy it for the clients. He leaned in, his lips brushing the shell of her ear. I bought it to own your contract, he whispered. You work for me now, Serha. You belong to me. You will never run from me again. You can't do this. Serha gasped, pushing against his solid chest. I can quit. I resign. Tae-Jin chuckled, a dark, humorless sound. He tossed a legal document onto the table. Read page 4 of your contract, Tae-Jin instructed smoothly. There is a non-compete clause. If you break your contract without cause, you cannot work in this country for 10 years. Furthermore, there is a penalty clause for sudden resignation. 200 million won. You enforced a buried penalty clause? I own the clause. If you walk out that door today, I will freeze your bank accounts by tomorrow morning. I will drag you through a legal battle that will leave you bankrupt. So no, Serha. You are not resigning. Panic, pure and unadulterated, seized Serha's chest. She glanced desperately at the clock. It was 3:15 p.m. The kindergarten let out at 4 p.m. Tae-Jin, please, Serha begged, her voice breaking. I am sorry for leaving. I am so sorry for hurting you. But you can't keep me here right now. I have somewhere I have to be. I have obligations. Obligations. Tae-Jin's eyes narrowed, a dark, jealous fire igniting. What kind of obligations? A man? No, it's not a man. Serha pleaded, her hands grabbing his lapels. Please, just let me leave for today. I will come back tomorrow. I swear to you, I will come back and we can talk. But I have to go right now. You expect me to believe you? Tae-Jin asked roughly. You lied to me 5 years ago. You vanished into thin air. Why should I trust that you will walk back through those doors tomorrow? Because you have my bank accounts. Serha cried out, tears spilling over her cheeks. You have my contract. You just told me you have the power to destroy my life. I have nowhere else to run. Please, Tae-Jin. Let me go. I'm begging you. Tae-Jin stared at her, assessing the genuine, frantic terror in her eyes. He slowly stepped back. Fine, Tae-Jin said coldly. You have until 9 o'clock tomorrow morning. If you are not sitting at this exact desk when I walk in, I will burn your life to the ground. Serha didn't wait for him to change his mind. She grabbed her purse, pushed past him, sprinted across the bullpen, and slammed through the fire exit doors. Tae-Jin stood in the doorway, watching the heavy metal door swing shut. Sir, his head of security asked, stepping forward. Bring my car around to the alley exit, Tae-Jin ordered, his eyes pitch black. She is lying. She is hiding something massive. Follow her. The rain was coming down in thick, heavy sheets by the time Serha burst out of the office building. She flagged down a taxi, throwing herself into the back seat. Sunshine Kindergarten in the suburbs. Please hurry. Serha barked at the driver. Traffic is bad with the rain, miss, the driver warned. I don't care, just drive. I'll pay you double. Serha shouted, pulling out her phone. 3:45 p.m. She dialed the school's number with trembling fingers. Sunshine Kindergarten, how can I help you? The receptionist answered. This is Serha, the mother of the triplets. I am running a few minutes late. Please, do not let them wait outside in the rain, and do not call my emergency contacts. I am almost there. Of course, ma'am. We will keep them inside the lobby. Serha hung up, her chest heaving. Tae-Jin's father was dead. But Tae-Jin had become a monster. If he found out about the triplets, he wouldn't just take them. He would take her, lock her in a gilded cage, and never let her see the sun again. The taxi pulled up to the brightly colored gates just as the 4 o'clock bell rang. Serha paid the driver and scrambled out into the rain, running toward the covered awning. A sleek, armored black Maybach silently pulled up to the curb on the opposite side of the street, hidden by the torrential rain. Inside the luxurious cabin, Tae-Jin sat in absolute silence, his obsidian eyes locked entirely on Serha. Why is she at a school? Tae-Jin murmured to himself, a cold, sickening knot forming in his stomach. Did she marry another man? Did she start a family while I was dying? The heavy double doors of the kindergarten swung open. Mama! 3 high-pitched, joyful voices cut through the sound of the rain. Tae-Jin stopped breathing. 3 tiny figures broke from the crowd, running as fast as their little legs could carry them. 2 little boys and 1 little girl, all wearing matching yellow raincoats, launched themselves simultaneously into Serha's arms. Oh, my babies! I'm so sorry I'm late, Serha cried, dropping to her knees on the wet concrete. Hugging them so tightly, she practically buried her face in their small shoulders. Did you have a good day? I painted a dinosaur, the first boy shouted. Leo pushed me on the swings, the little girl pouted, burying her face in Serha's neck. I did not. Ilara fell on her own, the second boy argued, crossing his tiny arms. Okay, no fighting. Let's just go home, Serha whispered frantically, standing up and grabbing their hands. Inside the Maybach, the air grew terrifyingly thin. Tae-Jin leaned forward, his hands gripping the leather seats so hard the seams groaned. His eyes, sharp and predatory, zeroed in on the children. As Serha stood up, the boy named Leo turned his face toward the street, pushing his yellow hood back. The breath was violently knocked out of Tae-Jin's lungs. The boy had Serha's dark, curly hair and flawless brown skin. But his face was composed of stark, aristocratic, undeniable lines. And his eyes, piercing, calculating, deep obsidian eyes. They were Tae-Jin's exact, undeniable eyes. Tae-Jin looked at the second boy. Identical. He looked at the little girl resting her head on Serha's shoulder. She had his exact jawline. They are 5 years old, Tae-Jin whispered to the empty car. 5 years ago, she vanished. The realization hit him with the force of a freight train. He hadn't just been abandoned. He had been robbed of his own flesh and blood. Driver, Tae-Jin whispered, his voice a demonic, vibrating purr. Block the street. No one leaves. The massive Maybach pulled sharply across the wet asphalt, its tires screeching as it angled itself directly in front of the crosswalk, completely cutting off Serha's path to the taxi stand. Serha froze, her heart stopping dead in her chest. She recognized the car instantly. The rear passenger door swung open. Tae-Jin stepped out into the pouring rain. He didn't have an umbrella. He didn't care that his bespoke suit was getting soaked. He slowly walked around the front of the car, his eyes locked onto the 3 children clutching Serha's hands. Tae-Jin, Serha breathed, stepping backward, instinctively pushing the triplets behind her legs. What are you doing here? Who are they, Serha? Tae-Jin asked, his voice slicing through the sound of the storm, cold, deadly, and demanding an immediate answer. They are my children, Serha stammered, her entire body shaking. From my husband. After I left you, I met someone. Do not lie to me. Tae-Jin roared, the sudden explosion of his temper making the triplets flinch. He took 2 massive steps forward, completely ignoring the stunned parents, watching them from the awning. I have spent my entire life looking at my own face in the mirror. Do you honestly think you can stand there and tell me those boys do not have my eyes? You're scaring them. Serha shouted, spreading her arms out defensively. Leave us alone. Mama, who is the scary man? Leo asked, peeking out from behind Serha's leg, his dark eyes so perfectly mirroring the man towering over them, glaring up at Tae-Jin in defiance. Tae-Jin looked down at the tiny boy. His chest heaved. The sheer, overwhelming reality of seeing his own son staring back at him almost broke his iron composure. He slowly crouched down so he was at eye level with the 5-year-old. I am not a scary man, Tae-Jin said, his voice dropping to a surprisingly gentle, yet intensely firm rumble. What is your name? I don't talk to strangers, Leo stated proudly, puffing out his tiny chest. He's Leo, the little girl, Alara, offered helpfully from Serha's arms, her big eyes blinking at the rain. I'm Alara. And that's Minjae. Are you Mama's boss? She said her boss is a big meanie today. Tae-Jin's jaw clenched. He slowly stood back up, towering over Serha. The rain plastered his dark hair to his forehead, making him look wild, dangerous, and absolutely uncompromising. 3, Tae-Jin stated, staring directly into Serha's terrified eyes. You hid 3 of my children from me. They aren't yours. Serha tried one last, desperate time, though her voice cracked on the lie. My legal team will be at your apartment in exactly 1 hour, Tae-Jin said, his tone leaving no room for negotiation or escape. They will be accompanied by a private medical team. They will take a DNA swab from you, from me, and from all 3 of them. You can't force a medical procedure on my kids. Serha yelled over the rain. If you refuse to open the door, my security team will take the door off its hinges, Tae-Jin vowed, stepping so close his chest brushed against her wet raincoat. If you try to run, if you try to get on a plane or a train, I will have you arrested for kidnapping the heirs to the gene conglomerate. You have 1 hour, Serha. Go home and wait for me. He turned around, got back into the Maybach, and slammed the door. The massive car peeled away, leaving Serha standing in the pouring rain, clutching her children, knowing with absolute certainty that her life, as she knew it, was completely, irreversibly over. The red tail lights of the armored Maybach bled into the torrential rain, disappearing into the soul traffic and leaving Serha completely paralyzed on the wet sidewalk. The storm raged around her, but a deeper, much colder terror had completely taken root in her chest. She had 1 hour. "Mama, my hands are cold," Alara whimpered, tugging on the hem of Serha's soaked raincoat. The sound of her daughter's tiny voice snapped Serha out of her frozen panic. She couldn't break down right now. She had to get them inside. She flagged down a second taxi, her hands shaking so violently she could barely open the door to usher the 3 confused toddlers into the back seat. The ride back to their tiny, 2-bedroom apartment in the suburbs felt like a death march. Serha stared blankly out the rain-streaked window, her mind racing through impossible escape plans. She could pack a bag. She could take them to the train station. She could run. But Tae-Jin's threat echoed in her ears with absolute, terrifying certainty. If she ran, he would have her arrested for kidnapping the heirs to the Jin conglomerate. He had the money, the power, and the legal army to destroy her before she even made it out of the city limits. There was no escape. The ghost she had been running from for 5 years had finally caught her. The second they crossed the threshold of their cramped apartment, Serha shifted into frantic, maternal autopilot. She stripped the children out of their wet yellow raincoats, dried their hair with warm towels, and wrestled them into their favorite oversized pajamas. She turned on the television in the small living room, putting on their favorite cartoon to drown out the sound of the storm outside and the frantic, deafening pounding of her own heart. She looked at the clock on the cheap kitchen microwave. 55 minutes had passed. Serha didn't even have time to change out of her own damp clothes. She stood in the center of the narrow living room, staring at the front door, feeling as though the walls were slowly closing in to crush her. At exactly 1 hour, the heavy, aggressive knock sounded against the thin wood of the apartment door. "Serha, stop. Move out of the way, Serha," Tae-Jin said, his voice entirely devoid of warmth. "It is a simple buccal swab. It takes 10 seconds. Unless you are going to stand there and confess the truth to me right now." Serha looked into his eyes. There was no mercy there. Only the cold, calculated fury of a man who believed he had been robbed of his life. She swallowed hard, tears welling in her eyes, and slowly stepped aside. She knelt next to the sofa, wrapping her arms around the kids. "It's okay, babies. The doctor is just going to rub a little cotton swab on the inside of your cheek. It doesn't hurt at all. I promise." The process was agonizingly clinical. The doctor was swift, taking the samples from the 3 terrified, wide-eyed toddlers, then swabbing Serha and, finally, Tae-Jin. The doctor placed the vials into a portable, high-tech rapid sequence analyzer in the briefcase. "It will take exactly 3 minutes for the rapid genetic markers to align, Chairman Jin," the doctor said, keeping his eyes glued to the machine, terrified of the lethal tension in the room. Those 3 minutes felt like 3 lifetimes. The only sound in the apartment was the cheerful, utterly inappropriate music coming from the cartoon on the television. Tae-Jin stood completely rigid, his hands clasped behind his back, his eyes burning a hole into the floor. Serha remained on the floor, clutching her children to her chest, rocking them slightly. "The sequence is complete," the doctor finally whispered, his voice shaking. He pulled a digital tablet from the briefcase and handed it to Tae-Jin. "The genetic markers are a 99.99% match. You are the biological father of all 3 children." Tae-Jin closed his eyes. A sharp, ragged breath escaped his lips, sounding almost like a sob he managed to strangle before it could escape. The confirmation didn't shock him. He had known the second he looked into their eyes on the street, but hearing the scientific absolute spoken aloud sent a violent, earth-shattering tremor straight through his soul. 5 years. He had missed everything. He had spent half a decade drinking himself to sleep in a silent, empty penthouse, entirely unaware that he was a father. "Leave us," Tae-Jin commanded, his voice dropping to a terrifying, vibrating whisper. Within 10 seconds, The doctor and the security guards had exited the apartment, pulling the heavy door shut behind them. Tae-Jin slowly opened his eyes and looked down at Serha. The fierce, desperate way she was shielding the children only ignited the dark, possessive fire in his chest. He was the chairman of the Jin conglomerate. He was a man who took what he wanted and destroyed anyone who stood in his way. "Pack your things," Tae-Jin ordered, stepping around the cheap coffee table. His tone was absolute, demanding immediate compliance. "You have 30 minutes to gather whatever clothes have sentimental value. Leave the furniture. I will have my staff buy them everything new by tonight. You are moving into my estate." Serha's head snapped up, her dark eyes flashing with pure, unadulterated defiance. "I am not going anywhere with you, Tae-Jin. This is our home. You cannot just storm in here and kidnap us." "I am not kidnapping you, Serha. I am claiming my family." Tae-Jin roared, his iron patience completely fracturing. He pointed a long, trembling finger at the children huddled against her. "They have Jin blood. They are the heirs to a multi-billion-dollar empire. Do you honestly think I am going to let my sons and daughters sleep in a cramped, drafty apartment in the suburbs? You are coming with me right now, even if I have to physically carry you out to the car. Don't yell at my mama." The tiny, furious voice shattered the tension in the room like a hammer to glass. Tae-Jin froze. He looked down. Leo, the 5-year-old boy with his exact face, had wriggled out of Serha's arms and stepped directly between his mother and the towering billionaire. The little boy's tiny fists were clenched at his sides, his chest heaving under his pajamas, his dark eyes glaring up at Tae-Jin with an absolute, fearless hatred. "You are a bad man," Leo shouted, his voice cracking with tears. "You made Mama cry. Go away." Tae-Jin felt the breath violently leave his lungs. It felt worse than taking a physical bullet directly to the heart. "Leo, I am not a bad man. I am your..." He choked on the word, his throat tightening to the point of pure agony. "I am your father." "No, you're not," Min-jae yelled, standing up to join his brave brother. He grabbed a small, plastic toy truck from the rug and threw it as hard as he could. It bounced harmlessly off Tae-Jin's expensive Italian leather shoes, but the impact felt like a live grenade. "Our daddy is dead," Mama said. "You're just a mean boss. We hate you." Elara, the little girl with his jawline, didn't yell. She simply buried her face in Serha's neck and began to sob, completely terrified of the loud, angry stranger invading their safe space. "Mama, make him leave. Please, Mama, I'm scared." Tae-Jin stood completely paralyzed. He was a man who commanded thousands of employees. He could bankrupt rival corporations with a single phone call. He could make politicians bow to him. But staring down at 3 tiny, trembling children who looked exactly like him, the untouchable CEO realized his vast power was absolutely useless. They didn't see a billionaire. They didn't see a powerful chairman. They only saw a monster who was hurting their mother. "Leo, Min-jae, come here," Serha whispered, her voice breaking. She pulled the brave little boys back into her arms, kissing the tops of their dark curls. "It's okay. Mama is here. I won't let anyone take you." Tae-Jin's massive, imposing shoulders slumped. The arrogant, ruthless corporate titan violently shattered, leaving only a profoundly broken man standing in the middle of a cheap living room. His chest hollowed out entirely. The absolute, unfiltered rejection in his children's eyes was an agony he had never known existed. He slowly looked at Serha. She wasn't looking at him with anger anymore. She was looking at him with deep, agonizing pity. And that was somehow infinitely worse. Tae-Jin took a slow, painful step backward, putting physical distance between himself and the children. His knees felt weak. He looked around the small apartment again. He noticed the worn-out elbows on the children's sweaters draped over a chair. He noticed the stack of past due utility bills on the kitchen counter. He noticed the dark circles under Serha's beautiful eyes, the brutal physical toll of working a grueling corporate job while raising triplets completely alone. She had done this all alone. For 5 years. Serha, Tae-Jin whispered, his voice completely stripped of its usual commanding, lethal edge. It was raw, shaking, and desperately vulnerable. Can you put them in their bedroom? Please. Just for 10 minutes. I need to speak to you. Serha hesitated. She looked at his face, seeing the genuine, devastating heartbreak bleeding through his icy exterior. She gave a small, slow nod. Come on, babies, Serha murmured softly, standing up and ushering the kids toward the narrow hallway. Go into your room and play with your blocks. I'll be right outside the door. Don't let the mean man take you, Mama, Leo warned, glaring at Tae-Jin one last time before Serha gently closed the bedroom door. The click of the latch sounded like a gunshot in the quiet apartment. Serha turned around and crossed her arms over her chest, leaning her back against the wall. What do you want, Tae-Jin? You got your DNA test. You proved your point. Now what? Are you going to call your lawyers to rip them out of my arms? Tae-Jin didn't answer immediately. He slowly lowered his massive frame onto the cheap fabric sofa, burying his face in his hands. He took a long, shuddering breath that racked his entire body. When he finally looked up, his obsidian eyes were shining with heavy, unshed tears. How do I fix this? Tae-Jin asked, his voice cracking. The question wasn't a corporate demand. It was a desperate plea from a drowning man. I have all the money in the world, Serha. I can buy them islands. I can build them palaces. But they look at me like I am the devil. How do I make them stop looking at me like that? Serha swallowed hard, the sheer vulnerability of the man in front of her breaking through her defensive walls. You can't buy their love, Tae-Jin. You can't command it like you do your employees. To them, you are just a scary stranger who yelled at me in the street. I was angry. Tae-Jin burst out, standing up and pacing the narrow room like a caged animal. I was out of my mind with grief. You have to understand what it did to me, Serha. To see you holding 3 children, my children, and knowing I missed absolutely everything. I missed their births. I missed their first words. Why? Why did you do this to me? He stopped directly in front of her, his large hands hovering over her arms, desperately wanting to touch her but terrified she would pull away. You said you didn't love me anymore, Tae-Jin whispered, his voice breaking completely. You wrote that you wanted a simple life. But I look at this apartment, Serha, and I see you working yourself to the bone. You didn't leave for a simple life. You left to hide them. Tell me the truth. Please. What did I do that was so unforgivable that you had to fake your own death in my heart? Serha stared into his agonizingly desperate eyes. She had kept the massive, crushing secret for 5 years to protect him, to protect the children. But the man who had threatened her was dead. The threat was finally gone. It wasn't you, Tae-Jin, Serha finally whispered, the heavy walls of her terrible secret completely collapsing. Tears spilled freely over her dark cheeks. I loved you. God, I loved you so much it felt like I couldn't breathe when you weren't in the room. Tae-Jin completely froze, his heart stopping dead in his chest. Then why? Because of your father, Serha choked out, a ragged sob tearing from her throat. Tae-Jin's entire body went rigid. My father. When you went to Tokyo for that business trip 5 years ago, Serha cried, wrapping her arms around her own waist to keep from falling apart. Your father's security team pulled me off the street. They took me to a warehouse. He had my medical records, Tae-Jin. He knew I was pregnant before I even had the chance to tell you. Tae-Jin felt the blood in his veins turn to absolute ice. The horrific, sickening realization of what was coming began to suffocate him. What did he do to you? He told me that the gene conglomerate would never accept a black, foreign-born woman with no pedigree into the family. Serha wept, the traumatic memory violently spilling out of her. He told me that if I told you about the babies, he would make sure you were disinherited. And if I tried to stay, he said accidents happen to pregnant women every day. He said he would make me and my unborn children disappear, and no one would ever find our bodies. The silence that followed her confession was apocalyptic. Tae-Jin literally stopped breathing. All the color drained from his skin. He staggered backward, his legs hitting the edge of the coffee table, and he collapsed back onto the sofa. "He threatened to kill you," Tae-Jin whispered, his eyes wide with a horrifying, soul-crushing horror. "My own father threatened to murder my children?" "He handed me a blank check and told me I had 24 hours to vanish," Serha continued, wiping her face, the dam completely broken. "I didn't take his money, but I took the threat seriously." "You loved your father, Tae-Jin. You looked up to him. If I had told you the truth, it would have started a war that would have destroyed you. So I wrote the letter. I broke your heart so you wouldn't come looking for me. I did it to keep them alive." Tae-Jin bent double, resting his elbows on his knees, his hands gripping his hair so tightly he was practically tearing it from his scalp. A guttural, agonizing sound ripped from the billionaire's chest, the sound of a man discovering that his entire life, his anger, his bitter resentment, had been built on a lie orchestrated by his own family. He had spent 5 years hating Serha for abandoning him, when in reality, she had sacrificed absolutely everything, living in poverty and constant fear, just to protect his children from his own bloodline. "I am so sorry," Tae-Jin sobbed. The ruthless CEO, the man who never apologized to anyone, the man who terrified entire executive boards, fell off the sofa and straight onto his knees on the cheap linoleum floor. Serha gasped, stepping forward. "Tae-Jin, get up." "No," Tae-Jin wept, refusing to stand. He stayed on his knees at her feet, his massive, shaking hands gently gripping her waist, burying his face against her stomach as the sheer weight of his guilt crushed him entirely. "I am so sorry, Serha. I am so sorry I didn't protect you. I am so sorry I didn't see what he was doing. You went through the pregnancy alone. You raised them alone. You suffered every single day for 5 years, and I walked into your office today and threatened to ruin you." His tears soaked through the fabric of her damp blouse. Serha looked down at the towering, terrifying man kneeling on her floor, completely broken, entirely humbled. Instinctively, she reached down, her fingers trembling as they tangled in his dark, perfectly styled hair. "I was so terrified today," Serha whispered, fresh tears falling. "When you told me I couldn't leave the boardroom, I thought you were going to take them away from me." Tae-Jin violently shook his head, looking up at her, his obsidian eyes completely stripped of any arrogance or anger. "I will never take them from you. I will never do anything to hurt you ever again. I swear it on my life, Serha. I swear it." He slowly reached up, his scarred, elegant hands gently cupping her face. His thumbs wiped away her tears with an agonizing, desperate tenderness. "I was a monster to you today," Tae-Jin whispered, his voice thick with heavy emotion. "I was a tyrant because I was broken. But I see the truth now. You are the strongest woman I have ever known. You kept my family alive. You gave me the greatest gift in the world, and I repaid you with threats." He pressed his forehead against hers, closing his eyes, simply breathing her in. The faint scent of vanilla that had haunted his dreams for 5 years finally felt real again. "Please, Serha," Tae-Jin begged, his voice dropping to a fragile, desperate whisper. "I am not asking as the CEO of the gene conglomerate. I am asking as a man who has been bleeding out for 5 years. Please, help me." "Help you do what?" Serha breathed, her heart completely betraying her as the familiar warmth of his touch sent a cascade of electricity down her spine. "Help me win them back," Tae-Jin pleaded, opening his eyes to look directly into her soul. "I don't know how to be a father. They hate me, and they have every right to. But I cannot walk out that door and leave you here. I cannot survive another day without my family." He let go of her face and slowly stood up. He didn't tower over her. He didn't try to intimidate her. He simply stood before her, entirely vulnerable. "I won't force you to move to the estate," Tae-Jin said softly, completely reversing his earlier absolute command. "I won't force you to quit your job. I will rip up the non-compete contract right now. You hold all the cards, Serha. I am at your mercy. Just tell me what I have to do to make them stop looking at me like a monster." Tell me how to earn my place beside you again. Serha looked at the man she had never stopped loving. The ice had melted. The arrogant billionaire had been replaced by a desperate, devoted father willing to throw his entire empire away just for a chance to sit at her cheap kitchen table. They don't need a CEO, Tae-Jin, Serha said softly, a fragile, watery smile finally touching her lips. They just need a dad. A dad who brings them ice cream, plays with blocks, and doesn't yell. Tae-Jin swallowed hard, a beautiful, devastating relief washing over his handsome face. I can do that. I swear to you, I can do that. Serha took a deep, shuddering breath. The war was finally over. Okay, let's start with an apology. And then, maybe you can help me make them dinner. Tae-Jin stared at her, the words echoing in the quiet living room. Help me make them dinner. For the chairman of the Jin conglomerate, a man who had a staff of Michelin-starred private chefs at his beck and call, the concept of cooking a meal was entirely foreign. But as he looked into Serha's tear-stained, hopeful eyes, he would have gladly climbed a mountain barefoot if she asked him to. Dinner, Tae-Jin repeated, clearing his throat, hastily wiping the last of the tears from his face. Yes, of course. What do they eat? Come to the kitchen, Serha whispered, a small, genuine smile finally breaking through her exhaustion. Tae-Jin took off his $4,000 suit jacket, draped it carelessly over the cheap armchair, and rolled up the sleeves of his crisp white dress shirt. He followed her into the narrow, cramped kitchen. Serha opened the refrigerator. Tonight is spaghetti night. The sauce is already made. I just need to boil the pasta and cut up some hot dogs. It's their favorite. Hot dogs, Tae-Jin murmured, looking at the packaged meat as if it were an alien artifact. I can cut them. Give me the knife. Serha handed him a small paring knife. Tae-Jin stood at the tiny laminate counter, his massive frame practically taking up half the room, and began slicing the hot dogs with the intense, laser-focused precision of a surgeon performing a heart transplant. You don't have to cut them perfectly symmetrically, Tae-Jin. Serha laughed softly, leaning against the sink. Tae-Jin looked up, his obsidian eyes entirely serious. I am trying to prove I am not a monster. The least I can do is provide geometrically flawless hot dogs. A tiny gasp came from the hallway. Tae-Jin froze. He slowly turned his head. Leo, Min-jae, and Alara were peeking around the corner of the kitchen wall. Their little hands gripped the doorframe, their dark eyes wide with suspicion as they watched the terrifying giant chopping their dinner. Serha immediately knelt down, opening her arms. Come here, babies. It's okay. The triplets cautiously shuffled into the kitchen, keeping a wide, terrified berth around Tae-Jin. They huddled around Serha's legs. Mama, why is the mean boss cutting our food? Leo asked in a loud whisper, glaring at Tae-Jin. Is he putting poison in it? Tae-Jin closed his eyes, a fresh wave of agony hitting his chest. He slowly set the knife down and crouched so he was at their eye level. He didn't move toward them. He knew he had to let them set the boundaries. I am not putting poison in your food, Leo, Tae-Jin said, his voice softer than Serha had ever heard it. I am just helping your mama. I am very sorry I yelled earlier. That was wrong of me. I was upset, but I should never have raised my voice in your home. Min-jae narrowed his eyes. Are you going to yell again? No, Tae-Jin vowed, looking directly at the little boy. I will never yell in this house again. But I would like to stay for a little while, if you will let me. I would like to help your mama clean up and maybe I can be your servant for the week. Serha blinked in shock. Servant? Leo's dark, calculating eyes, so terrifyingly identical to Tae-Jin's, lit up with a sudden, mischievous power. The fear slightly ebbed, replaced by the natural authority of a 5-year-old realizing he suddenly had the upper hand over a giant. You want to be our servant? Leo asked skeptically. Yes, Tae-Jin replied without a single ounce of his usual corporate pride. Whatever you need. You tell your mama, she will tell me, and I will do it. Alara peeked out from behind Serha's leg. Even if we want the pink cup? Especially if you want the pink cup, Tae-Jin said completely seriously. And so, the absolute, humiliating, and beautiful humbling of the untouchable CEO began. For the next 7 days, the chairman of the Jin conglomerate did not step foot into his towering glass headquarters. He canceled board meetings. He ignored multi-million-dollar acquisition calls. He lived entirely in a cramped, 2-bedroom apartment in the suburbs, sleeping on a worn-out fabric sofa that was 2 feet too short for his massive frame. By day 3, Tae-Jin was entirely stripped of his billionaire aura. He wore a pair of gray sweatpants and a plain white t-shirt Serha had bought him from the local market. And, much to the absolute delight of the triplets, he wore a bright pink floral apron whenever he was in the kitchen. He became the lowest-ranking member of the household hierarchy. Servant giant. Leo shouted from the living room, standing on top of the sofa with his hands on his hips. I need my blue dinosaur. It's under the television. Tae-Jin, who was in the middle of scrubbing a stubborn stain out of a frying pan, immediately dropped the sponge. Coming, Leo. Serha watched from the kitchen table, her heart swelling with an emotion so intense it brought tears to her eyes. The ruthless, terrifying corporate titan was currently on his hands and knees, reaching under a dusty TV stand to retrieve a plastic dinosaur. He handed the toy to his son with a solemn bow. Your dinosaur, sir. Leo snatched it, a massive, delighted grin breaking across his face. Thank you, servant giant. Now go get Minjae's juice. Right away, Tae-Jin said, turning back to the kitchen. He didn't just play the part, he surrendered to it completely. Everything went through Serha. If the kids wanted a snack, they asked Serha, who relayed the order to Tae-Jin. If they wanted a story read, Serha chose the book, and Tae-Jin sat on the floor at the foot of their beds, reading in a deep, soothing rumble until they fell asleep. By day 5, the fear had completely vanished. The turning point happened in the tiny, cramped bathroom. Mama, we need bubbles. Ilara shrieked happily from the bathtub, splashing water everywhere. I'm out of bubbles, sweetie. Serha called from the hallway where she was folding laundry. Ask the servant giant. Tae-Jin walked into the bathroom, holding a brand new bottle of bubble bath he had specifically ordered his security detail to drop off outside the apartment door. He leaned over the edge of the tub. Bubbles coming right up, Tae-Jin said, squeezing the bottle into the running water. Minjae looked at Leo, a wicked glint in his obsidian eyes. Without a word of warning, Minjae slapped his tiny hands flat against the surface of the water, sending a massive, soapy tidal wave directly into Tae-Jin's face. Tae-Jin gasped, sputtering as soap and water dripped down his nose, soaking his white t-shirt. The bathroom went completely silent. The triplets froze, suddenly terrified they had gone too far. They waited for the giant to yell. They waited for the terrifying boss to return. Tae-Jin slowly wiped the water from his eyes. He looked at the 3 trembling toddlers. And then a low, deep rumble started in his chest. It built up his throat until it broke out into a loud, booming, genuine laugh. Oh, so it's a war, is it? Tae-Jin chuckled, his eyes dancing with joy. He cupped his massive hands and splashed a gentle wave of water back at them. The tension instantly shattered. The kids shrieked with pure delight, splashing him back. Within 2 minutes, the bathroom was completely flooded. The kids were coated in bubbles, and Tae-Jin was sitting on the wet tile floor, completely soaked, laughing harder than he had in 5 years. Serha stood in the doorway, leaning against the frame, watching the man she loved play with their children. Tears streamed silently down her face. He had done it. He had completely broken his own ego into a million pieces just to build a bridge to their hearts. That night, after the children were finally asleep, the apartment was quiet. Tae-Jin was standing at the kitchen sink, washing the last of the dishes. He was still wearing the gray sweatpants, his dark hair falling messy and damp across his forehead. Serha walked into the kitchen. She didn't say a word. She simply stepped up behind him and wrapped her arms around his solid waist, resting her cheek against the broad expanse of his back. Tae-Jin froze, his hands gripping the edge of the sink. He closed his eyes, a heavy, shuddering sigh escaping his lips. He turned around slowly, his wet hands hovering in the air so he wouldn't get her wet. "You're crying," Tae-Jin whispered, looking down at the tears shining on her cheeks. "Did I do something wrong? Did I scare them again?" "No," Serha sobbed softly, shaking her head. She stepped into his space, pressing her hands flat against his chest. "You didn't do anything wrong, Tae-Jin. You did everything perfectly. I was watching you with them today, and I am so incredibly sorry I stole this from you. I am so sorry I took 5 years of this away." Tae-Jin's heart physically ached. He didn't care about his wet hands anymore. He wrapped his massive arms around her, pulling her flush against his chest, burying his face in her dark, vanilla-scented curls. "Do not apologize to me, Serha," Tae-Jin murmured, his voice thick with raw emotion. "You protected them. If you hadn't run, my father would have destroyed you. You saved our family. Every time I look at them laughing, I know that you suffered in the dark so they could stay in the light. You are a hero. My hero." Serha tilted her head up, looking into the deep, consuming obsidian of his eyes. The physical tension between them, simmering beneath the surface for the last 5 days, finally reached its boiling point. The air in the tiny kitchen grew heavy, electric, and agonizingly hot. "I never stopped loving you," Serha whispered, the truth finally, completely spoken. "Every single day, I woke up missing you." Tae-Jin let out a ragged groan. "And I have been dying for 5 years without you. Please, Serha, tell me I can stay. Tell me I don't have to go back to an empty penthouse. Let me take care of you. Let me protect you the way I should have 5 years ago." "Stay," Serha breathed. Tae-Jin didn't hesitate for another microsecond. He crashed his mouth down onto hers. It was a kiss built on half a decade of agonizing grief, devastating longing, and absolute, unconditional devotion. Tae-Jin backed her up against the kitchen counter, his hands tangling in her dark hair, his mouth moving over hers with a desperate, branding heat. Serha wrapped her arms tightly around his neck, kissing him back with all the pent-up love she had been forced to hide. He tasted like tears, relief, and absolute safety. They didn't move from the kitchen for a long time, holding each other, whispering promises into the dark, healing the wounds that had almost destroyed them. On the morning of the 7th day, Tae-Jin was asleep on the cramped sofa. His long legs dangled over the armrest, the pink floral apron draped over the coffee table nearby. He was woken up by a sudden, heavy weight dropping directly onto his chest. Tae-Jin grunted, his eyes snapping open. Leo was sitting squarely on his stomach, completely fully dressed in his weekend play clothes. Standing next to the sofa were Alara and Minjae, holding their favorite stuffed animals. "Wake up, servant giant," Leo demanded, crossing his tiny arms. Tae-Jin smiled sleepily, rubbing his eyes. He didn't mind the title anymore. It was a badge of honor. "Good morning, Leo. What can I do for you today? Do you need the TV turned on?" "No," Leo said, his dark eyes so perfectly mirroring his father's, suddenly turning incredibly serious. The little boy looked down at Tae-Jin. For the past week, Leo had watched this massive man take orders, get splashed with water, cook bad hot dogs, and treat his mother like a queen. The fear was entirely gone, replaced by the profound, instinctual bond of blood. "Mama said you are going to stay here forever," Leo stated, a slight tremor of hope in his tiny voice. "Is that true?" Tae-Jin felt his heart stop. He slowly sat up, bringing Leo with him so the little boy was resting comfortably on his lap. He looked at Minjae and Alara, who stepped closer, leaning against his knees. "It is entirely true," Tae-Jin promised, his voice thick with emotion. "If you will let me, I will never leave this family again. I will be right here, every single morning, for the rest of my life." Leo stared at him for a long, silent moment. Then, the little boy reached out his tiny hands and grabbed the collar of Tae-Jin's t-shirt. Okay, Leo whispered, his lower lip trembling slightly. But you can't be the servant giant anymore. Tae-Jin blinked, confused. I can't? Did I do a bad job? No, Leo said softly, suddenly throwing his tiny arms around Tae-Jin's thick neck, burying his face in his shoulder. Because Mama says servants don't live here forever. Only dads do. The dam completely broke. Tae-Jin let out a choked, wet sob. He wrapped his massive arms around his son, crushing the little boy to his chest, burying his face in Leo's dark curls. Oh, God. Thank you. Thank you, Leo. Minjae and Alara didn't want to be left out. They scrambled up onto the sofa, throwing themselves into the embrace. Tae-Jin pulled them all into his lap, his massive frame easily holding all three of his children. He held them as they giggled, completely surrounded by their warmth, the empty, hollow void in his soul finally, permanently filled. Serha stood in the hallway, leaning against the door frame, a cup of coffee in her hands and a brilliant, radiant smile on her face. Tae-Jin looked over the heads of his children, his obsidian eyes locking onto hers. He didn't look like a cold, ruthless CEO anymore. He looked like a man who had just been handed the entire universe. Mama, Dad is crying again. Alara announced loudly, patting Tae-Jin's cheek. It's okay, baby, Serha laughed softly, walking over to the sofa and sitting down right beside them. She leaned her head on Tae-Jin's broad shoulder. He's just really, really happy. Tae-Jin wrapped his free arm around Serha, pulling her tightly against his side, kissing the top of her head. He had the money to buy the world 10 times over. He had an empire that spanned the globe. But sitting on a cheap sofa in a tiny apartment, surrounded by the beautiful black woman who had saved his soul and the 3 tiny children who had his exact eyes, the untouchable billionaire knew he had finally found his true kingdom. He was exactly where he belonged.